there were a number of different passages from a number of different historians who took account from the time of 1776, after the Declaration of Independence was drafted, signed, and released. Our founding fathers, almost to a man, said, yeah, that pamphlet of common sense really swayed my view. That's how much power that pamphlet had to ring true in the ears of our founding fathers, that independence was the route we needed to take.
Welcome to the Republic Podcast, where history meets scrutiny and facts matter. Join Rob and Lou as they dive deep into the foundations of American democracy, dissect the laws that shape our lives, and challenge the narratives behind today's headlines. From forgotten chapters in the U.S. history to the legal truths they didn't teach you in school. This is your front row seat to get informed, unapologetic conversation. We have an American republic, if we can keep it. Now, let's get started. All right, and we're back.
Dude, we are back.
What's going on?
Lou, my
Cheers,
brother.
My brother. Cheers, everyone out there.
Everyone out there.
This is the Republic, If You Can Keep It podcast. I'm Lou.
If you can keep it.
If you can keep it.
I'm Rob. He's Lou. And today, we're going to do something a little different.
Really?
We've been talking about, as you know, from following Lou and Rob, we've been talking about the foundational documents. But what inspired our founding fathers to make this huge leap, to put their bodies, to put their lives, their fortunes, as they say in the Declaration of Independence, bind ourselves together in this noble cause? There were some things that inspired the colonists, that inspired the founding fathers to make these steps. So we figured we really want to share those, at least some of them, because there were more than just a few, but we're not going to go on forever. But some of the things that you should go and take a look at if you're not already familiar with it.
Right. And there's, several documents. Of course, everything that we can go back, and if we really wanted to, go back to the Magna Carta and to the letters in the UK and go back as far as we want. But there were some very seminal letters and writings in the United States, or back then in the colonies, that really shaped the Revolutionary War movement, the independence movement, that were so pivotal and so meaningful. Yeah, pivotal. So and so meaningful that it really did sway what I don't think we've really stressed enough how close this was. Really, this was a close call.
Right.
And that it's because of these letters and these writings that it really turned the tide in favor of independence.
Yes. And we're going to go back and we're going to start with a writing from one of our ultimate founding fathers from Pennsylvania by the name of John Dickinson. And John Dickinson thought it was particularly important that he published 12 weekly letters that we now refer to as the letters from a Pennsylvania farmer. And he did it anonymously. And this was back in 1767. So this is well before the Constitutional Convention, where we talked about the founding fathers getting together and talking about independence in 1776. This is almost a decade before. The colonies were being subjected to the Townshend Acts.
Yes.
Sorry. And in Great Britain, they were looking to push a number of different acts and legislation toward the colonies. Among them, a Revenue Act, a Commissioners of Customs Act to enforce collection of duties and taxes, an Indemnity Act to put taxes on tea, and the New York Restraining Act, because at that time the state of New York, or the colony of New York, was not paying the crown to quarter their soldiers in New York City homes.
Yeah.
There was also I believe a Vice Admiralty Court Act,
right,
which was going to skew the judicial system as it was then operating more towards the crown in certain disputes. And John Dickinson said to himself, this is unjust. It's not something that we should tolerate. And he published 12 different publications in the Pennsylvania Gazette, I think it was called.
Right.
And ultimately they gained traction not only in Pennsylvania, but throughout the colonies. And he really was at the forefront of basically saying, no, we shouldn't tolerate any sort of injustice against the colonies. We need to get in early and stamp it out.
Right. And I mean, and I think, before we get into that, it's one thing that it's important that we also stress how really back then there was a dearth of information on what was going on. That's not like we nowadays where, you get information overload. You turn on the TV, you turn on the radio, for those of us that still get the newspaper in actual print form, back then everything was in print, and it was just very localized. Everything was a very localized source of information. You dealt with the town that you were in. You maybe if you were in a larger city, you got some of that information, but very rarely did it go beyond that. And it was these writers, these people, these movements that brought news from all the colonies and pushed a movement forward towards independence. What Dickinson would be doing back then nowadays would be essentially the person's own like Reddit forum or like a web page or something like that, a blog. But
Right.
back then it was these people were most of the time were using their own money to publish these newsletters just because they wanted to get the information out. And if you were lucky, you would have some gracious benefactor that would actually pay to have this put out. But most of the time it wasn't that way. But now we have
Right.
the writings themselves.
And when John Dickinson started his each week for 12 weeks, a different pamphlet or article, this was 2 years after the colonists had basically shut down the Stamp Act, which was in 1765. The first time, really, that the British government had, I want to say, a black eye or had to retreat from it. But the colonists stood up and basically shoved it back to them and said, no, we're not going to do this. This is unacceptable. So, feeling their oats, as you will, he says, with these 5 or 6 different acts collectively known as the Towson Acts, no, we can do this. Mm-hmm. And among those articles, he talks about, and I'm looking at my notes, he said, is the British government too big to challenge? No, we have already successfully tossed aside the Stamp Act. And importantly, and this is going to be a theme which is going to recur throughout the colonies and throughout the Revolution and throughout the Constitution, and it still holds true today here in 2026 in the United States of America. And he says, if injustice is allowed to stand, it only gets harder to challenge if you let it stand. As soon as you identify it, you really need to nip it in the bud. You need to address it openly and make sure that you get your point across. And he wasn't advocating for violence, and he made sure in his writings that was the case. We talk about dialogue, we talk about economic boycotts and things like that, but you have to identify it and actually do something about it. Get up, get off your duff, and mobilize and unite against injustice. And that's the theme that goes through all 12. And that sets the table in many respects for the American Revolution.
Right. And then from beyond that, so you have Dickinson, who was set the foundation. Then following up on him, you have Thomas Paine, and that he wrote several different things. The most important ones were, again, the Common Sense, which was the document that really sort of almost shaped the shaped the Revolutionary War, shaped the movement for independence. And one of the greatest things about that is that it wasn't just like rah rah rah. We're like we're colonists. We don't want government. Like we don't want UK governing over us anymore. It was more again akin to like the Declaration of Independence, where with the 28 different indictments that they handed down against the UK government and the king, that Thomas Paine in Common Sense actually said, it's not just we want our own independence. We don't want anything to do with anything that you set up. We don't want to have a House of Parliament. We don't want to have a House of Commons. We don't want to have anything like that. We want to set up our own form of government and set up a
he was
Republican form of
one of the
government.
first people who talked about having representative government.
Right.
And it was in that pamphlet of Common Sense. Now, something that people often don't know about Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine was originally, and before doing all of the stuff with Common Sense, had been an abolitionist. He was one of the first abolitionists.
Mm-hmm.
And he had started and co-founded one of the first abolitionist societies in the colonies. Once he heard and news came down to Philadelphia where he was, and I would say a little more than a little bit of kismet for this country that he was in Philadelphia, and we'll get to that in a minute. But once he heard of the shot heard around the world and the skirmishes and the fights that went on in Lexington and Concord in 1775, as Lou said, it wasn't automatic communication like we have now. It took a while for that information to get down to Philadelphia from the Boston area. Once he heard of that, he shifted his focus towards independence. He said, we don't need this. We don't need the British government. We don't need the crown. He was very much a radical about it. And he, in late of fall of 1775, began writing Common Sense, which was published in January of 1776, 250 years ago.
Right. Exactly.
And where was he again? In Philadelphia. Where was the Constitutional Congress set up? Philadelphia. I think there are writings, and I don't know, I wish I could give exact quotes from the different sources, but in my readings and research, there were a number of different passages from a number of different historians who took account from the time of 1776, after the Declaration of Independence was drafted, signed, and released. Our founding fathers, almost to a man, said, yeah, that pamphlet of Common Sense really swayed my view. That's how much power that pamphlet had to ring true in the ears of our founding fathers, that independence was the route we needed to take.
Right.
And if you haven't read it, we're going to put
the
links
link
in the
I was just going to
comments.
say, it's going to be linked in here. And I mean, it was so powerful and so moving, and it was something that just energized the country. And then it didn't stop there for him either, where then he also went on and wrote additional documents about it. He called it the American Crisis. And it took that independence movement and made sure that it continued to move forward, even during the Revolutionary War, beyond the Revolutionary War to the, and when we had our initial independence, during the Articles of Confederacy, and the growing pains that this new nation had. And it's actually a quote which I just love, and I'm pulling up because I want to make sure that it's here, that it was in, and again, it was a series of 13 pamphlets that he wrote. And that one of the most moving statements in it was, these are the times that try men's souls.
Yep.
And that's what he was saying, that we need to be able to harden ourselves to understand that we did the heavy work. We got our independence, but now we need to be able to keep our independence, and we need to be able to grow this country the way that we said that we should. And that's something significant. And, I think that at that same time, one of the other things were, just like we had the balance and the point counterpoint, the federalists, the anti-federalists, we were talking about government and about how the Constitution should be shaped. that you also had other writers that were writing against the revolution and against independence. We had James Chalmers, who, as a counterpoint to common sense, he wrote Plain Truth, and it was one that it basically said, "Yeah, no, we need to stay loyal to the UK, to loyal to the crown because of these reasons." And again, it was something. It was a back and forth.
And we've said it before on this podcast, and you will see it in all of the historical recounts of the time, in all the history books that you'll read, and you will be reading about it because Lou and Rob have kindled the interest for you. At that time, before July of 1776, the majority of colonists did not want or have the idea to separate from the crown. They were loyal to the crown. They didn't want to be abused by the crown. They didn't want to be taxed. They didn't want to be put upon by, but there wasn't a thought, generally speaking, of, yeah, we should be, marking our own path to independence. No, which is why things like common sense are so important, because they really kindled the idea. And in those recitations of the time, they talk about George Washington reading the pamphlet or having it read to his troops to talk about why it's so important that we're doing what we're doing for independence. If George Washington's pulling that out and having it read to the troops, it really spoke to the people, the colonists, and who they were as a group and a collective as of 1776, 1777. Now, Lou had mentioned one of the other pamphlets that Thomas Paine wrote, The American Crisis.
Right.
Thomas Paine wound up actually volunteering in the Continental Army, and was an aide-de-camp to General Nathaniel Greene in 1777. Now, we had mentioned this before in the podcast too, before July of 1776, colonists were pretty well feeling their oats. They had already had the siege of Boston and driven the Brits out of Boston. They had some success up in upstate New York, with skirmishes here and there, some in Rhode Island. But generally speaking, especially the Boston campaign, made us feel pretty damn good. We're like, Once and after the Declaration of Independence was signed and the British mobilized, that point in and through 1777, and there's no exaggeration to say they basically kicked our ass.
Right.
They kicked, with all due respect to our founding father, George Washington, they kicked his ass out of New York, out of Long Island, out of Brooklyn, out of upstate New York, through New Jersey, down past Philadelphia.
Basically into
throughout
Virginia.
the year.
Right.
So at the time when the American Crisis, and it was aptly named, was released by Thomas Paine in 1777, it was really the nadir of our experience. It was the low point. There were mass defections from the Continental Army. People were like, well, this is what we get. We get all uppity and up in our britches, going up against the crown. We didn't want to do this to begin with. And the American Crisis, the pamphlet, helped rally the people to the cause once again.
Right. I mean, and the unique thing about it is that there's actually stories about Paine writing it while under fire. I mean, that there's active fighting going on, and he's writing this and has, one, the wherewithal, but two, the fortitude, where you've got a battle, you've got a war going on right there, and literally hundreds of feet away. And this guy's taking the time to put this stuff down because it was so important to him. He wanted to make sure that people understood that this is something that was worth fighting for, and that we need to keep this movement going. No matter, basically, some in substance, at all costs, because we had nothing to go back to.
And before and during the Revolution, we've just talked about Letters from a Pennsylvania Farmer. We've talked about Common Sense. We've talked about the American Crisis. Those are only three
Right.
of some seminal publications that really helped turn the tide, to help bolster the cause, to help, keep people focused on the prize of independence. There were others. I mean, there were different revolutionary, as they called it, the colonists out of Boston and, in Philadelphia and in, whether it was Charleston, South Carolina, and other places that were churning out some information for people to actually understand why we're doing what we're doing. Absolutely. These are not the only things, but they are some seminal things, which if you are interested in the history of this country, which you ought to be, which is why you're watching Lou and Rob right now, these are things, and they're not 300 pages long. It's not going to take you that long to read, but it's really invaluable that you read it.
Right. I mean, and beyond Paine and beyond Dickinson, that one of the other big writers and one of the most influential people at the time was Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson, while not writing these, these letters or these pamphlets, or being like Paine was or like Dickinson was with these regular things, he would constantly go out and he would write these, just a single letter to have read to the colonists that would sort of summarize that, you have, what is it, a summary of view of the rights of the British America that he wrote back in 1774, which was basically, these are the rights that we have, and these are what the ones we should have, and this is where we're moving, and this is why we need to. And again, it was another push
And it helps set the table.
independence.
Right.
And he continued on through this entire period of time. So if you ever have a chance to read any of Jefferson's writings, beyond the Declaration of Independence, which is just as we said, is the world's greatest breakup letter ever. And if you haven't read it yet, after our first episode on it, you've got to read it. That is one where it is something that, again, it's aspirational. It's not one saying that we have achieved this, but we want to achieve this, and that we're not a perfect nation, but we're always moving towards that. And
Right.
that's something that, that we have to keep in mind. 250 years in the world, in the entire look at world history, we are an incredibly young country, and that we're still learning, but we're doing the best that we can to fulfill those promises made in the Declaration and in all these inspirational writings.
And one of the things also, in addition to the three that we've identified, Thomas Jefferson setting the table in 1774 and going forward, the other thing that in each of the colonies, which was so important, was and were the state constitutions.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Each state had its own constitution, and there was it was organic. It was from grassroots. It came from the people. The people were consulted about through the representatives about how this is all done. So ideas of liberty, ideas of representative government, ideas of independence first started with those documents as well. The charter in Virginia, the charter in the colony of Massachusetts, Connecticut as well.
I was going to say,
some of the three that were the most foundational, that when the founding fathers in Philadelphia in 1776, they're really pulled from primarily Virginia, because Thomas Jefferson was drafting a lot of the stuff for the Declaration of Independence. He was familiar with the Virginia state constitution, but also the ones from Massachusetts, the ones from Connecticut, Pennsylvania, South Carolina. All of these had a great contribution, and it kept everyone, not just kept everyone, but it also had been involving everyone in the colonies who were interested in their own determination, their self-determination. Again, other publications, other documents that helped spur on the revolution.
Yeah. And one, as Rob mentioned, in Connecticut, that's where we first met each other, and we've known each other from there. But the story of Connecticut, where if anybody's not familiar with the story of the Charter Oak in Connecticut, that's an incredible story where the that it was actually when Connecticut was being overrun by the British that they took the state charter and the founding documents and hid it in an oak tree outside of Hartford.
And Hartford, right.
Yeah, and you could actually still see the area where the oak tree stood. And so and that's where, so when they were running from the British, they stuff it inside the hole, a hole inside this tree, and end up coming back for it later on after Hartford basically burned. Um, and I think that one thing that we also have to look at is, while these writings were also inspirational, that they also recognize the need for compromise as well. And that's one thing about, especially about these the state constitutions that were so seminal in and so moving and so inspirational, that they were based upon compromise, and that it was the, our own constitution. And I don't know if we stress that enough when we were talking about the Constitution, but that's something in looking at these things, how really the Constitution in the United States is all compromise. That there was, people go back and forth about the, Federalists and anti-Federalists, the pro-slavery versus the abolitionists, the, the, and it was just the loyalists
It goes on and on and on, right.
and on and on and on. And it's one of those things where, in order to hobble together this country, because that's really what it was, there had to be compromise and people had to be willing. So our Constitution is not perfect, but it's as perfect as it could get, and it's been something that's lasting. And that's why, these documents really were so foundational in setting forth the you know the bones of it, but also the compromise in it.
And we've talked about this before, and for those of you who've been watching, you remember,
Mhm.
um, our country is founded upon debate. And while we roll our eyes in the back of our head when we think about Congress today and how everything is, gridlocked and everyone is just so polarized, there's a reason why we roll our eyes in the back of our head, not because we're exasperated, although we are, but it does a disservice to the intentions that were given by our forefathers and the founding fathers of this country. You have, in order to move along, you have to get along.
Right. Right.
There is a lot of, there are a lot of moving parts. There are so many things that are being brought up in any given legislative session, whether you're in the Continental Congress talking about independence, whether you're in the Continental Congress debating the terms of the Constitution, whether you're talking about 2026 and the budget and the multi-billion dollars that this country has revenue for and how it's going to spend it. When we started this country back in 1776, it was founded upon passionate people who wanted to put their point across, but also not only their mouth, but they had ears and they were willing to listen and consider what someone on the other side of the aisle, or aisles, because there was more than two parties at the time, or not just, you had to be one or both, one or the other. It was really identifying what an issue is and talking about it and listening and how can we best move this forward. That was put down in common sense, the representative government, and how we do this stuff. We'd already been trying to do this with the Continental Congress, and it was codified in our Constitution. Checks and balances, two houses bicameral in Congress. All of these things come from not just our founding fathers, but where did the founding fathers get it?
Right.
We talk about, this is what this episode is about. It's a little different, but we want to give you what the inspiration for the founding fathers were.
Mhm. Exactly. I mean, one it's sort of a little side tangent here, but um there was a great mini series. I guess we used to call them mini series. I guess they're limited edition, whatever now. But it's called Death by Lightning. And if you haven't seen it yet, I'm recommending it to everybody. It is a short TV series about James Garfield and the ascent of James Garfield from where he originally put forth a nominating speech for, of course, now I'm blanking on who it was that he was at the time. And
This is 1876 or something around that
yeah,
time.
yep. And that, so he was giving a nominating speech for a presidential candidate
Right.
amongst the Republican convention. And just by how well he spoke and his passion behind what he spoke, they actually broke and nominated him for president. He never wanted to
Right.
be president. And it's one of those things where, and the reason why I bring it up is like, Lou, why are you bringing this up? Because it was all about negotiating, where James Garfield, for his short tenure, read the system and knew what he needed to do to work the system, to get it to work, to achieve what he wanted, but to achieve what was best for a young nation at the time. And that ultimately led to his assassination. And that, so it's Death by Lightning, the story of James Garfield and his assassination. It's a great series. So if anybody has a chance to do it, I'll include the link in there in the things as well. So I'm off on my side tangent now, but
no, but it serves the point, while it's not that he didn't have aspirations for higher office, but his goal was to speak for someone else.
mm-hmm.
And the result was conversation.
Right.
The result was debate back and forth. That's
Excellent.
what this whole American experiment should be about. Well,
right.
Among other things, it's the foundational, part of it.
Right. And so with this, that's room for debate. That's room for discussion. And that's room for people to sort of weigh in. Now, again, we appreciate everyone here. This is, we're now well over 2,000 followers at this point. So we want to thank you. We did it last time.
Thank you so much, but it's not enough. We want to keep going.
Right.
Spread the
word. We want to keep pushing the message. Send it out. Like, share, subscribe. Let us know. Share, spread the conversation. Let us hear back from you. Because again, this is a debate. And, be aware. There is the algorithm on YouTube where if you put in something in the comments, we're not the ones responsible for cutting you out, because we've had a few of those where people are like, well, why aren't you responding? It's like, well, I never saw it. And then I checked with YouTube and that's why. And so, but anyway, we appreciate the conversation.
Everyone, you be respectful.
Right.
Be positive. Be introspective. Ask questions. We're happy to answer whatever questions you come. That's great. Spread the word. In the channel, if you go in and look for our channel, there are a couple of different polls. Ask them, answer them, because we're trying to figure out what the best route to communicate to you might be. What are the topics? What are the issues? What are the means by which to do them? We've done special editions. We've done the Declaration of Independence. We've done the founding documents. We're going to be moving on to the revolution itself. We'll also have thoughts about the founding fathers, talking about each one of them, what that is. If there are other items and questions that you have, or thoughts or ideas, share.
Right. And if you disagree with anything, as Ted Lasso said, be a goldfish. And on that, cheers to you all.
Cheers.
Thank you for subscribing. This is the Republic If You Can Keep It podcast. I'm Lou.
I'm Rob.
And we'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Shut up and sit down.
Thanks for listening to the Republic If You Can Keep It podcast. Join Rob and Lou in our next episode as we continue our riveting discussions on the most important topics affecting our great republic. Drop a line for topics you want to discuss, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time.